I would go to some affiliate conferences once I quit my job, like Affiliate Summit, and Commission Junction had an annual event that I'd go down to Santa Barbara for. But, didn't discover podcasts for several years after that. Was kind of an island, kind of on my own. And it was lonely. I didn't discover the magic of mastermind groups or podcasting for lots of years.
Podcast Junkies, episode 308. Welcome back. I'm your host, Harry Duran. Regular listeners, thank you so much for coming and showing up day in, day out, whether you've been here from episode 1 or you just found the show last episode. For those for whom this is brand new, welcome, welcome, welcome. I really appreciate you taking a chance on this show. This is the one where I talk to some of the most interesting voices in podcasting from my perspective. And my objective is just to get them to kick back their heels and talk about their shows and whatever else is on their mind. I think what really brings us together from a podcasting perspective is this passion that we have for the medium. And this is the energy that I want to bring to each one of these conversations. It's exactly what happened last week with Diana Ray. She's a broadcaster, she's an interviewer, she's a content creator, she's a producer, a voice talent, and she's a seeker. And lastly, she's the co-founder of the Mind, Body, Spirit Podcast Network. It's so interesting the way things happen, and people who have been listening to me for quite some time know that I'm a firm believer in the power of the universe putting things in our path at the right time. I've been thinking about this idea of creating a network for shows that are related to spirituality and raising consciousness. And this is exactly what Diane and her co-founder are working on at mindbodyspirit.fm. She's the founder of the Mind, Body, Spirit Podcast Network, a platform for content creators. In this episode, we talked about how to handle radio and podcast interviews, because that's her background in radio, a bit about some of the interesting ad structures and revenue sharing models, and something that's near and dear to my heart, the power of spiritual awakenings and how that's allowed her to build this fantastic community. I want to remind you that if you're enjoying this episode or past episodes, I'd love it if you leave a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/podcast junkies, and I'll be sure to read those out on future episodes. This week, I speak to Nick Loper. He's the founder and chief side hustler at Side Hustle Nation. It's a community of like-minded and hardworking folks looking to make extra money and build businesses. What's so fascinating is that the way this journey goes in podcasting, Nick and I actually met way back, I think it was 2014. We talked about it on the show. And we were just in the same space, meeting some of these new podcasters who had been doing it for like 2 or 3 years and who we were looking up to and modeling. I think for some part, I'll speak for myself. Just fun times to see some of those folks some of those are still friends of mine now and that I've gone on to build friendships with, which is really, really great considering how nervous I was when I got off that shuttle van at New Media Expo in January of 2014, not knowing anyone. Maybe for some folks online, I think of folks like Chris Saroon, who's still a friend to this day. And it's just been an interesting journey. So it's a nice sort of throwback reminder and appropriate episode as we close out the year to think back on how much the show has grown and the lessons that I've learned along the way. And it was nice to have Nick on as that reminder as well. We talked about where his entrepreneurial spirit came from and why he's looking to pass the lesson of working for freedom down to his children. And he shares and is vulnerable about the lessons he's learned from failure as well, which I appreciate. We talk about the evolution of his relationship with his listeners, fatherhood, and the value he places on creativity. I know I say this a lot, but this was really one that was a long time coming. I remember trying to coordinate or just asking Nick, and we just couldn't make the times work. And this has been going on for years. So it's been really nice that we were able to make this happen. Before we jump into this episode, a few words from the folks that support this show. I'm grateful for the opportunity to partner with Focusrite. I'm so excited to talk about their newest line of sound cards, the Vocaster. It's got an endless list of features. I'll go through a couple here. Auto gain, easily set your levels with the click of a button. With more than enough gain on tap, 70 dB, no booster needed. An enhanced feature which allows 4 podcaster-approved voice presets, which will bring out the best in any voice. You can silence the mic with the touch of a mute button and record phone calls, high-quality music, or any audio from your device seamlessly. You can record to a camera, directly to its memory card. It's got a loopback feature to stream calls or any other audio you can think of from your computer, and 3 amazing packages of software, Hindenburg Lite, 3 months of Squadcast Pro plus video, and 6 months of Acast Influencer. What an amazing package. You can learn more at podcastjunkies.com/vocaster. All right, Nick Loper, host of Side Hustle Show. Long overdue conversation on Podcast Junkies. Thank you so much for making the time.
You bet. Always happy to geek out on all things podcasting.
When did we first connect? Was it Podcasters Paradise?
Could have been like 2014, 2015, at one of these events.
Were you at New Media Expo in 2014?
I was there. That's when I first met Jared. That's where I first met Dan. That was a long time ago.
That's wild. So basically I was still in my 9 to 5. I was working on a mobile app for electronic music. It was called Know Your DJ. And I was like, I want to start a podcast and interview DJs. And I looked up conferences and New Media Expos. There's bloggers, YouTubers, and podcasters.
Yeah, gosh, that was early days, man.
And then Chris, what's Chris's last name? He was introducing Jared's talk. I mean, not Jared's talk, Cliff Ravenscraft's talk. And he was like, who's like a podcast junkie? And I was like, I am. I had like 20 shows on my phone because I was just binging all a bunch of stuff.
Okay.
And then I came back from the conference and I was like, I think I'd rather talk to podcasters. They're going to be easier to talk to. And I want to learn about what makes a good show. So it's kind of like Inside the Actor Studio, but for podcasters.
There you go. And now here it is, 8-9 years later.
300 plus episodes. And we'd keep running into each other at these, either that conference, I think NAB probably maybe, and then early days of podcast movement as well.
Yeah, you were always on brand with your bright yellow shirt. It's like, there's Harry.
Yeah, I remember in Vegas, I think, hanging out one time. And I remember I would be running to each other at some of the events. I'd be like, okay, you got to come on. And it's so funny how so many years have gone by. But I've always wanted to have you come on and tell your story. It's very inspirational. And so, your entrepreneurial journey goes back, I think, a couple of years before mine, wherever you think it's appropriate for you to start. And then maybe we'll go back even further, but maybe just kind of where entrepreneurial journey and the podcast started to come online for you.
Yeah, we can trace the origin story, as far back as you want to go. I was the kid, selling candy to my fellow Boy Scouts at summer camp. Let's go to Costco before, grab these bags of Skittles and stuff. Yeah.
Before the phrase was popular.
I feel like I was really hit or bit by the entrepreneurial bug in college. I was, painting houses over the summer through one of these college painting kind of franchise network type of deals. And that was my first real taste of, being in charge of my own schedule, kind of, calling the shots and either making it work or not. And that was my first taste of working for profits instead of wages. And you kind of had this little shift from, the goal being to get a job, and the goal kind of shifts to how do you make money without a job? And it was kind of an interesting turning point, this little business owner shift of, what was going on in my young and malleable brain at that time. But post-college, my first online side hustle was a comparison shopping site for footwear, which is back in the early days of the internet, the good old days, people would start their product search on Google instead of on Amazon. And you'd have sites like Price Grabber and Nextag and shopping.com where they would tell you where you could find the best price on whatever it was you were looking for. So my idea was what if we build that, except niche down, and we'll just do it for shoes, and we'll do it better than anybody else. Because we'll have, product level coupon integration, and we'll calculate the tax and the shipping and all this stuff. And so ran that business for a lot of years, for 3 years as a side hustle, and then another 5 or 6 as kind of my main focus. And it was on the side from that, the Side Hustle Show was born, and lots of failed projects too, for the sake of full disclosure. It's stuff that never really got any traction, didn't really know what I was doing. But the other site that stuck around for a long time was a virtual assistant directory and review platform, like Yelp for outsourcing companies was that business. But that one and the Side Hustle Show were kind of the fallback plan for when the shoe business kind of faded into the sunset.
Where were you looking for inspiration? Who at that time, what was available from resources, people to look up to, people to learn from? What was available at that time?
For the
Shoe Sniper days.
It was, pre-WordPress, or it was at least pre my awareness of WordPress. And so it was all custom coded. Like I put a job out for bid on guru.com, which is kind of like a precursor. I think it's still around actually, but a precursor to Elance, Odesk, Upwork. And one of the guys who bid on it, lived just half an hour away from me in Northern Virginia. So I go over to this guy's apartment. He, after several, minutes of this conversation, I think he realizes like, it's just me. It's like this 22-year-old dude, maybe 23 at that time. And he's like, oh, okay, let me, I was bidding here based on, a company reaching out to me, but it's like just some random, young kid. And so he and his team built the thing. They supported the site, really almost for close to 10 years after that. And it was, just one of these little, random niches that ended up working, very heavily reliant on paid traffic. Never really figured out the SEO game for that business, but played in the margin between what you could buy, long tail product specific keywords for on Google and what that was worth in terms of affiliate commissions. It was like, I was heads down. I was like, reading books from the library, business books, marketing books, but none of it was like super applicable to the specific.
Or dated, right?
Yeah. I would go to some affiliate conferences once I quit my job, like Affiliate Summit, and Commission Junction had an annual event that I'd go down to Santa Barbara for, but, didn't discover podcasts for several years after that. Was kind of an island because it was kind of on my own and it was lonely. I didn't discover the magic of mastermind groups or podcasting for lots of years.
Did you have any mentors or someone that was helping you guide you along the way?
Just flying in the dark.
It's crazy when people have to think about like folks that are just getting started. You see like these 12-year-old entrepreneurs now like starting businesses, and they've got so many resources and so many YouTube like tutorials. There's like nothing you can't learn online, and especially now if you're young, you have nothing but time, right? And so they're whipping up these businesses and trying and failing, and they probably had like 3 businesses before they hit their 16th birthday.
Which is awesome, like to get those reps in and everything. I remember reading Reed Hastings' book, co-founder of Netflix, and he talks about like the early days of Netflix, and they had to raise $2 million to get it started because you had to like build your own servers and you had to like figure out this whole like payment processing system where it's like, now with WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, like thousands of free themes, plug it into Stripe, plug it into WooCommerce, like you're good to go, with these off-the-shelf solutions. But they had to custom code everything, and it was like, yeah, it cost that much just to get it off the ground.
Did you have a Netflix subscription? Did you get those DVDs in the mail?
I never did. We held out until it was streaming.
It's so funny when like the Blockbuster days. I mean, I remember watching Lost and getting into that TV show. It's such an awesome series, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. By now, I think everyone by now has seen it, but I remember we'd run to like Blockbuster to get the next season because we were just like, oh my God, we got to watch. Nice. It was a crazy cliffhanger, and you couldn't wait for like Netflix to send it to you. But it's so funny just kind of thinking about Netflix as an upstart now and just how huge they are now and how far they've come.
Absolutely.
And so when did podcasting come on your radar, or did you start to listen to them to like learn some of the business stuff?
Yeah, I started listening probably 2011, 2012, and it would have been Tropical MBA podcast, which was the lifestyle business podcast in its early days. That's still in rotation. Those guys are still at it 10 years later. It was, some early Smart Passive Income episodes. Those were super inspiring. Those were probably the 2 that really, I will credit as getting me hooked on podcasting as a listener.
Yeah, me too.
And, striking the idea of what would be the show that I want to listen to. Like I loved, skip the high level theory, give me the tactics, right? Like this is the show that I want. Like, how'd you come up with that idea? How'd you get your first customers? Wait a minute. How'd you figure out how much to charge for that? Like all of that stuff was fascinating to me in 2013 and really still is. Like 500 episodes later, it's that 0 to 1 type of story, and then that 1 to 10, like the initial liftoff and then the scale. Like I still love all that stuff.
I love talking to folks that have been doing it for such a long time, because I think a lot of podcasters, especially new podcasters, they're so worried about like the sound of their voice and like what the first episode is going to look like and who they're going to talk to. And I don't think you can really explain or train people what that experience is going to be like until you just actually do it. and you have like awkward conversations, or your mic isn't working, or your guest doesn't show up, or you run out of questions, or then you figure out like, better on your interview skills or better at your guest selection skills. Can you recall back those early days, like how much of it was just like fly by the seat of your pants and just learn as you go?
It's like you don't know what you don't know, right? It's just like you're putting in the reps and you're trying to get better every week, but it's still a matter of everybody has to kind of go through that sucking phase, for the first 50 episodes, before, maybe
Totally.
even 100 before you start to like really feel comfortable behind the mic and you start to nail down a process and being comfortable, with the guest to say, time out, let's pause, let's, let me ask that again, or let me ask that a different way, or let's regroup, we're trying to cover 10 years of history here. What would happen if we just like focus in on this one marketing tactic that really worked for you? And let's dive in on that. And so some of those tend to be salvageable, and editing salvages a lot too, where it's like you might record for an hour, you might record for an hour 15, and you scale it back to 45, 50 minutes through the magic of editing. But I don't know if there's a shortcut for it, because it's just you trying to get comfortable behind the mic, and it comes through practice.
How did you think about getting started? Like, I'd love to kind of maybe see if you can wind the clock back, put yourself in that like beginner mindset, knowing, and it's hard because you know already now what you went through, but just kind of those early days of like, oh, like where do I go to like learn about the mic? And you did join Podcasters Paradise, right? John Lee Dumas's group.
I was never in there, but knew many of those folks.
Okay, yeah, because it seems like we were in the same circles. Yeah, so like, where did you go, and how did you just kind of thinking through your thought process for like, okay, I know I want to start a podcast, and then what?
Yeah, I relied really heavily on Pat, free video tutorial series that he had. I've plugged that lots of times. I think it's like podcastingtutorial.com is his redirect for that. And it's still live. He's updated it, since 2012 when it first was released. And I was so green. I didn't know, like, well, you need a media host. And I was like, oh, I thought, iTunes would just like host this stuff. Like, I don't know. And it was $15 a month. Had it been 25 or 30, the show might not exist. Like, what am I committing myself to? I just have to keep paying this like forever as long as I want this thing to exist out in the world. It's like, I don't know, but
that's a lot of money, like when you're just getting started.
Yeah, 15 seemed reasonable. It's like, all right, let's roll the dice. And I was, am I going to commit to doing this weekly, but am I going to run out of people to talk to? Like, and all that. And now it's like 500 episodes later. I don't think I've missed a week since like, Christmas or Thanksgiving in the first year. Awesome. And it's just, the ideas keep coming. They kind of bubble up out of the community. You get introductions and recommendations to other guests. And it's, I don't know, kind of a self-fulfilling at this point. The wheels start to spin. But early days, like, it's painful. You're starting with no audience and you have to celebrate like the small wins. Like I remember like the first, 50 download day. And it's like, and you get a little bit nervous because you're like, I think I have reasonably exceeded my own circle of marketing influence right now. And that's kind of intimidating. That means like a stranger on the internet is listening to us. What if they think it sucks? And all of a sudden like it's super vulnerable, right? It's a weird medium in that it's super anonymous. You see like the blips on the chart, but unless you say something dumb, unless you screw up, you don't always get a lot of feedback. You don't always get a lot of comments, email responses. So it can be a little bit lonely at times, despite knowing that there's lots of people out there tuning in.
What was your tech stack early? Because I remember I wanted to have that face-to-face, and I was able to piece together Skype with call recorder. So I was able to have the video and then obviously not use it back then. Now we've got easy tools like Squadcast to make that our jobs easier. But what were you recording with back then?
I didn't do any video for 5 years, 6 years. I didn't do any video for a long time because I'm off looking at my notes. I'm off looking at other tabs. Like, I'm not making eye contact anyways. I was on, and I still am on PC. So I had like some third-party Skype recording software that I used for a long time. I've used Squadcast. I've used Zencaster. I've used Zoom for a handful of interviews. Those are probably the main ones.
Yeah. And then what's interesting is I think a lot of folks take it for granted, like the ease of use of having these video tools available. I feel like there's a different skill set when you just have the audio. It's like your ability to listen in on your guests and to find opportunities to like how to engage with them. And like when they're silent, you're like, are you still there? Like, I don't know if any of that happened, but like, did you feel like you had to be more attentive because since it was audio only?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe it's like a listening practice. And sometimes you go back and you'll listen to your episodes or you'll review the transcript and you kind of see these like missed opportunities where you're like, oh, why didn't you poke harder at that? Or, that would have been the natural follow-up. As I'm listening again, my mind goes here, but in the moment, it doesn't always happen. And you hear that on other shows too, where you wish the host would like, okay, go one step deeper. Don't let him get away with that, But it was years before I really started reviewing any sort of transcripts either. Very little editing. I should have done just like the half-hour YouTube tutorial on how to edit audio, because I edited it all myself for the first almost 3 years and didn't know anything about compression. So it was just like amplify everything. Like let's just blow out the mics. And I apologize to my early listeners.
How much research were you doing to your guests back then?
I would go into almost every episode, not necessarily with having done like a pre-recording like intro call, but with at least an outline of the story arc that I wanted to cover, or the main talking points that I want to cover, and still do that today. And that's mainly to I send that to them in advance. Some people look at it, some people don't, but mainly for me to kind of guide it, where we think it'll go. And if something gets interesting, we'll go off over there for a little bit, or we'll dive deeper, but generally keeps me on task of like, okay, here's the takeaway or the transformation that we want somebody to learn in exchange for their 45 minutes of tuning in, because it's gotten better, but it's still a hurdle to get somebody from stranger to listener, like that big first leap to say, maybe their friend recommends they go check out this show. They got to find their podcast app. They got to search for your specific show. They got to scroll down to the specific episode you're talking about. They got to find a 45-minute gap in their day to like actually tune in. It's a big ask. And so the hook for that has got to be really compelling.
It's so interesting because when I think about how many shows I had on my phone back then, I was learning about mobile apps. I was learning about online business. I was listening to Pat. I was listening to like Tropical MBA guys. And I was just like, when you're in like learning mode, you're just voraciously consuming all this content, and it's so hard to think about it because even with like 2 shows I host now, and then the agency that we have, you just don't have enough time in the day. I've gotten better at 2x in shows now because I feel like it's the only way I can get through some of that content.
Yeah.
How has your listening, your consumption of podcasts changed?
It's definitely decreased. It's become, I don't know. I mean, if you have something where you really want to, catch up on, like Dan Carlin is like my example of that. Like whenever there's a new hardcore history episode, it's like I will like purposely go around the house with the ear, with one earbud in, like, oh, they're all like 5-6 hours long.
That's an investment of time.
Yes, yeah. It's like, oh, I'll take the dog out. Volunteer for these different chores and stuff. During commutes, I remember like driving up to the mountains in California, and I would do like Seth Godin's startup school at like 2x, and the drive has never gone faster. Like, oh, this is fantastic. Or we, would drive up from California to Washington for Christmas, and the fastest drive we ever did was when Serial came out, and it was like we had like 12 hours of Serial episodes to go through, and it was like, oh, this is great. So that's a powerful place to be as a podcast host, is somebody's company, somebody's companionship on these drives in their earbuds. It's a really powerful relationship you start to build over time.
How has your relationship with your listeners changed over the years? I imagine, I don't know to what extent how many people have started with you, discovered you halfway through, and just continue to listen to you. And so can you talk a little bit about the community you started to build over the years as well?
Yeah, it's a show that people hopefully graduate out of at some point, where they find their idea and then they go off and do that thing. And so there's a little bit of turnover in the audience, but you still get people who are like, oh man, I've been with you since 2014, 2015. And that's really cool to do, especially when you meet people at conferences and events and they say, oh, it was your episode on, self-publishing in 2015 that got me started. And then this, kind of the snowball starts rolling. So that's really encouraging. And that's probably been the most unexpected benefit of doing all of this stuff, is having a network of, I would consider internet friends, like all over the world, really. We've had meetups, starting with this guy in Vietnam. He like, I must have put out in the email or said on air, like, hey, we're going on this trip to Southeast Asia. And he's like, are you coming to Ho Chi Minh City? Like, I need to buy you a coffee. And so that was like the very first, unofficial side hustle show meetup. And we've done, all over the country whenever I'm at events. We've done Japan and Prague and Mexico City. And it's been an absolute blast to get to meet people in real life.
And so were these trips that you had planned on like personal trips, and then you just kind of just baked in the meetups and just asking whoever was going to be in town?
Yeah, personal trips or business conference trips.
Yeah. And then when did you start the speaking? Because I noticed you've done some of that as well. Like as just the show got more popular, you just started applying to be on stages?
A little bit. If somebody asks me, I will try not to decline that. Like, okay, I'm flattered by that, and that's an honor to do. The one that I, really went after early on, which was like total imposter syndrome, was a local like TEDx talk. And it was, I had volunteered there the summer before. It's like, our town has a TEDx. Like, this is so cool. And they really, they got the red carpet and the letters on the stage, like the black box theater and everything. And so I sent a note to the organizers, like, raising my hand, like, hey, I'd love to, come on. I can talk about creativity or something, whatever their theme was from the previous year. I didn't hear anything for months. I was like, well, maybe they're not doing it this year. Maybe they thought my pitch sucked. I don't know. They finally write back. They're like, hey, we got your proposal. We got your note. Thanks so much for volunteering last year. But our theme isn't creativity. It's education. Or, maybe it was vice versa. I think it was on creativity. And, what do you got on that topic? It's like, yeah, I got something here. Oh, that's cool. Do you have any speaking experience? It's like, well, I got this podcast. And that was enough. That was really interesting to say. It was like total deer in the headlights, total like physiological stress response, like being up on the stage, like, did I rehearse enough? Am I going to be able to get through this with no notes? But it was a really cool experience and a really cool bit of social proof to be able to have that badge up on the website and say, yes, a TEDx speaker.
That's so awesome. Make sure you send me that link. I want to make sure it's put in the show notes. How much time did you work on that talk?
Months. It was really grateful to have some friends, and they actually assigned me a local speaker coach who's really helpful. And especially her early feedback was like, it's okay. And it's like, as entrepreneurs, we always say like, we want feedback, but what we really mean is like, we want validation and 5-star reviews. But she was good. She was like, I think you could do better. This section sucks. It was like, all right, back to the drawing board. My brother definitely helped review a draft or two of that. And it was pretty nerve-wracking time, but it was really cool to be able to do it.
How much time were you on stage for the total talk?
It was like 12 minutes.
Yeah, longest 12 minutes.
Yeah, so like the month prior was like no podcast listening. Like every walk, every car ride, every trip was just like going through in my head, like making sure that it was committed to memory.
Yeah, and so do you get to use slides for those TEDx talks?
Yeah,
you do. Okay, that helps a little bit. And so how did that help you, or when you think about like the experience and leading up to it and then after you've spoken it, do you feel now like more confident speaking in public or just speaking in general? Does that have to do with the podcast?
Yeah, I still get a little bit, nervous before going up on any stage, but when I do like little conference breakout things, you try and meet people in the audience, try and learn what they're up to, try and, find a few like friends and advocates in the state, in the crowd for you. So you can, they're rooting for you. And I think that's my general strategy. I don't do a ton of it. So I have never gotten paid to do any speaking. Actually, I take that back. I got paid to do a like virtual, essentially like guest spot it was like through US Bank or something a couple years ago. And it was like, man, I'll stand around and answer questions for half an hour. That was interesting, but that was, one that they proactively reached out to me for.
That's very cool. Yeah, I took some speaker training, and one of the things they tell you to do is like, when you see someone who's engaging with your talk, it's just that whatever that one person is, because you're just like trying to figure out where to place your eyes, and you see that one person who's just like nodding their head, and you're like, okay, like I'm talking to you. This is like a one-on-one conversation with you. And I think I've always said, we were talking about Podcast Move, and I just spoke there in June, and as long as I have like one person, like say like, hey, like I really connected with your talk, or That one was well received. Someone came up right after and he's like, the best talk of the conference by far. Like you really knocked it out of the park. And I think just having that intention of just affecting one person is something that really feels more attainable as opposed to just be like, oh, I'm going to crush it. I'm going to have like a standing ovation or something like that. So it's interesting. How have you grown as a host on the show over, with 500 plus episodes in?
Yeah, it's a matter of trying to get better every time out. And I think like I know my tone has evolved. My just stage of life has evolved over the last 9.5 years, where it was very young and hungry and probably more, aggressive. Like, I don't even know, like what, you go back and listen to some of the early episodes, but just like, no excuses, let's go get it done. And now with a family and, different perspectives, you're like, different seasons of life. Like if you got a 6-month-old, like maybe you don't need to be getting up at 5 a.m. to do your thing. Like, it's going to be there tomorrow, just take it easy a little bit. So I know that tone has definitely softened over the years. I think I've become a better host in terms of preparing guests, like what to expect, and also giving them a stage to get themselves out there. I've heard from lots of people like, hey, I've landed a bunch of clients since being on your show. That was, the biggest spike that I ever saw in traffic. I've gotten so many nice messages on Instagram. And so all that stuff is super rewarding as well. Kind of going in with that hook in mind and then trying to find the right guest to tell that story. And then, through the cleanup editing process to really make it a fun listening experience.
And talk a little bit about how the business itself has grown. Like, what have you been possible to build from the podcast? Maybe like a community a little bit, or any additional offerings that have sprouted up as a result of having the show?
Yeah, so early on, had no business model in the early days. It was kind of like, blog and podcasts, step 2, question mark, step 3, profit. And it's like, I don't know what that middle looks like. It was a little over a year into the show, like episode 64, I think is the first one that really, turned this on. And it was the recognition that, a podcast by itself is not a business. It can be a perfectly viable content marketing arm for a business. And shifting that was a huge turning point, a huge inflection point. And what that looked like in practice, in my case, was creating episode-specific lead magnets, episode-specific opt-in offers. Was like, how can I turn this largely anonymous and small listener base into an email list, into email subscribers, where now all of a sudden I can promote the next episode. They have something, easily forwardable in their inbox if they want to share it with a friend. I can promote my own products and services in something that's immediately clickable versus, relying on them to remember some, short link URL or something. So that was, like I said, maybe 14 months into the show, had 1,000 email subscribers at that point. Within 3 months, it was 3,000. Within 6 months, it was 6,000. Within 12 months, it was 12 or 13,000. It was a huge turning point, and didn't see a drop off in listenership over that time. Listenership actually grew, which was something like, well, if I'm giving the text summaries away, who's going to tune in and listen? But still, lots of people were tuning in and listening. And then you can kind of track, over time, like revenue growth moves kind of in lockstep with email growth, and that's been pretty rewarding to be able to, hit send and now broadcast out to a bunch of people.
85K, is that what I saw on the site, on the email list?
Yeah, 85K, probably closing in on 95K. I'm trying to get to 100 by the end of the year.
And then how do you think about that now? I'm sure you're conscious with that type of audience. How do you decide what to offer, and what's the current mix of offerings look like now?
Yeah, so the mix today is sponsorships on the show, which is a decent standalone business, but, it's not setting the world on fire. Because, podcast, monetization through sponsorships, unless you have a super niche audience, is kind of like, a game of amplitude and frequency. It's like, how many people can you reach? How big is the audience, and how often are you going to reach them? And that's why, EO Fire does really well. We got a big audience and we do it every day. And so you make a ton of money on sponsors. But in my case, with a once a week show, it's a, very grateful. It's a great full-time business, and that's awesome, but it took a lot of years to get there. The other piece of the pie that's actually probably a little bit bigger is the affiliate piece of the pie, which is a little bit through the podcast, but mostly through the website and email list, where it kind of took a while to recognize that's largely a different audience. I thought early on it was kind of one and the same, but the website traffic is much more transactional. It's much more, type something into Google looking for a specific answer to this specific question, find it, move on with your life. And yet I'm trying to capture them on the email list, trying to get them to download an episode or two, like, hey, come on in, the water's warm. But, trying to meet those people with where they're at and provide, product and service recommendations that meet their need or meet their search intent. And then, historically, the third leg of the stool has been my own side hustle experiments, which that was kind of the thesis early on, was I'll be the guinea pig. I will, test out these different things. I had all these grand plans to, go drive for Lyft and report back on how that worked and, test all these different things out, and ended up doing a lot of, freelancing stuff in the early days, sold some stuff on eBay, sold some stuff on Amazon, did some print on demand stuff, playing around in these different niches. And so historically, and still had my own other affiliate sites and stuff at that time, the shoe business and the virtual assistant site. And so that was historically the third leg of the stool, which has, especially since selling the VA site in 2020, that's been a very short and stubby leg of the stool lately.
It's interesting. You got a lot of experience with the virtual assistant business and the shoe finder business. I imagine like some of that you were able to like use those lessons in thinking about opportunities for revenue generation with side hustle.
Especially the VA site. That was really my first exposure in using WordPress for something other than kind of just a blog/journal type of platform. That was my first YouTube videos, my first email list, my first like social media accounts. It was and first time like, even a blind squirrel finds a nut again every now and again, like the first time like actually getting traffic from SEO and like, oh, this is how the game works. Like targeting kind of actually a combination, like high buyer intent type of keyword, like this company versus this company. Okay, that searcher has done their homework and they're just like, point me in the right direction. They're trying to make their decision, or, this company review, or this company legit, those types of, they're like, oh, I'm reasonably sure, like I'm thinking of signing up for this. Like I just want somebody to, validate. I'm looking for some crowdsourced reviews. And so that ended up working really well. But then also targeting some terms that were higher in the buying decision cycle, higher in the funnel, like, just virtual assistant companies, best virtual assistant companies. How do virtual assistant taxes work? What does a virtual assistant contract look like? And same thing with Side Hustle Nation. So a lot of, idea list posts, a lot of, ways to make extra money. What are the best side hustles for teachers? Type of informational content in that way.
I remember Pat talking about a lot of that on the show, and it was just like everything like he would talk about. I'm like, I wonder if I could try that. And then he was doing the keyword stuff and just getting traffic. He did the food truck thing for a while. He was just trying all these. I think he called himself like the crash test dummy for like a lot of these experiments. And I remember at one point I tried to build like a page of all the random topics. It was like German Shepherd puppies. I think somehow I ended up with that. And I remember spending like weeks trying to figure out like how to drive traffic. Needless to say, that's not where I ended up. But it's so funny the things you try. And there was like these just stuff that, when you look back and think about how much, thousands of dollars I spent on those early like get rich quick programs online, especially when you're new, because there's no one like teaching you or like holding your hand for this. You got to jump in and try some of these. And some of them are just like scams, I guess, for lack of a better term, or just maybe just not meant for you and not in alignment with your skill set. So I'm wondering how much stuff you tried and threw at the wall along the way.
Yeah, that's an important point, is thinking of, peeling back a few layers, like, well, how does this business model really work? What's the work required to get there? And, if it does work, 3 to 5 years from now, if I'm reasonably successful at this, is that a win? Like, am I happy with that outcome? And you try and find somebody who has walked that path and, listen to interviews that they've given, or even, see if they would treat you to a virtual coffee or something, like, can you mentor me for a little bit? And, what does their day-to-day look like? Is that something that you're happy with? There's lots of side hustles where the answer is like, well, even if it does work, it's not a huge win. And if that's the goal, then that's okay. But if the goal is, something life-changing, put you on a different trajectory, it's like, well, you gotta keep that in mind almost from the get-go. But there was like share about a failed project. I was like trying to work on this like wine related affiliate site, which I know nothing about wine. The site had no reason to exist. Like I wasn't adding anything unique value into the world. It was like garbage. Like, I don't know. But I was like, well, we kind of live like in, medium wine country. I don't know why I even came across this niche, but it was in the research for that. I came across this site that was reviewing wine clubs, and they had like user generated content. People could submit their, votes. And I also, as an affiliate, knew what they were making on the back end for signing up new customers for these wine clubs. It's like, oh, that's a really interesting model. What could I pivot that to that I do know something a little bit more about, that was based on a personal pain point of mine? I'd be curious to spend some time in this industry to learn a little bit more about it. And that's how the virtual assistant site was born, out of my own struggles for like hiring somebody for the shoe business. It was like, I could go post an ad at like the local community college, but I don't really want people like coming over and working at my kitchen table. Like, how does this, are these people going to steal my ideas? How does it work? Time zone wise, training wise. Yeah. Which of these companies are, okay operators? And that's how that site, was kind of born out of this failed wine project, but, kind of pivoting to another niche.
Do you keep track of like the folks that have listened, that I don't know if you'd call them graduates of Side Hustle Nation, or like, keeping track? I'm sure there's been some really nice success stories of folks that have been part of your community.
Yeah, so I have a tag in Gmail called testimonials. So when people do send me a note, I'll drag it over there. It's like right below the tag that says hate mail. So it's like, okay, I try and fill that one up faster, but try and take, it's like, well, if you're not pissing anybody off, maybe you're not doing it right. It's like, sometimes it's just like, unsubscribe me. It's like, dude, just click the button. Like, why are you going to make me do this? But yeah, try and save the testimonials, try and take the screenshots if people say nice things on Facebook and stuff, and file those away. Because when motivation is low, when kind of like, well, there's always another Thursday coming around. I got to come up with another topic. It's like, okay, there are people tuning in. There are people taking action. You are changing people's lives. And that's always helpful to remember.
So what's a typical production week look like for you now?
Let's see. So try and batch to a certain extent where, record 3 or 4 in a week, and then go through I dump everything into otter.ai for, a quick transcript. I will, mark up the sections that, I'd like the editor to trim. We try and record more in a single take format these days, baked in intro, baked in outro, and then, I'll go in and record the ads and say, well, here's the timestamp to put in, ad number 1, ad number 2. That's been a time saver versus, before, record the episode and then go back and kind of like, script out, an intro, script out an outro. As long as I'm organized and know who the sponsors are going to be, kind of know what my general calls to action are going to be before hitting the record button, single take format definitely saves some time.
Where are you hosting now?
Still with Libsyn.
Okay. And they've got dynamic ads now, or is it you still got to just insert?
I'm doing a baked in right now.
Okay. Yeah.
I know people are trying to get me switched, especially for like promo swaps. That's always been the challenge, like trying to align with somebody whose like audience is roughly the same size. But it's like, oh, if you're doing dynamic, you just run your 50,000 impressions and then swap it out for something else. Like, okay, someday soon.
So now, how much time do you spend thinking about what the next couple of years are going to look like? Do you spend time on a roadmap, or just quarterly planning, or something along the lines?
Yeah, historically have worked in kind of like 4-week, project-based sprint modes, where it's like, this is the, something that's achievable in the next, month or two, versus trying to come up with, okay, what are the big goals for 2023? Like, I don't know, it's just a guess at this point. Thinking a lot more about, what the future of the show is like. I mean, one theory that I'd like to test, I feel like people are tuning in more for the content than they are for me. So it's like, what would it look like to bring in a co-host once a month, twice a month? And like, Bigger Pockets is an example where the original hosts, Josh and Brandon, like they kind of like phased themselves out. Spencer from Niche Pursuits doesn't host his podcast anymore. I think I would miss it, but it's like, okay, could you reduce that workload? And like just eyeing down the road, like what would make this brand an attractive acquisition target? And, right now it's very much, still a personally branded project. Much more, the website less so, but the podcast for sure. And it's like thinking about that, like, do you keep doing this for another do you have another 500 episodes in the tank? Do you do this for another 10 years? You just keep doing it until it's no longer fun and exciting. I don't know. Like, it's existential. What would you do next? You got to answer that. Like, I don't know. How would you spend your time? But really cool to take a bunch of time off this summer, hang out with the kids, enjoy the beautiful Northwest weather. And, I found often that time off really, kind of is a creative reset in a lot of ways. It gets you energized to jump back in the game and see what impact you can have.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially, coming even from this culture, like side hustle culture, the hustle culture, or just the entrepreneurial like mindset of just always feeling the need to be on and feeling the need to be like doing something to grow your business. I should be working my show, or I should be working on like looking for guests. And I think what you just mentioned, this idea of finding times to rest, or just, my partner's just like, let's go for a walk. I'm just like, but I'm in the middle of something. She's like, no, it's a nice day out. It's sunny out. Like, let's do that. Or let's go hang out in the backyard. And I think my challenge has been a little older. I came from like 20 plus years in corporate. Like, if I wasn't at my desk at like 9 a.m., like I would feel guilty. I feel like I was late for work. And so it's an interesting mindset. And I don't know if you know like the range of the demographic of the folks that listen to your show, but I'm wondering how much of that for folks is people that are leaving corporate to try a side hustle, or just a younger generation that's just, starting earlier in life.
It really does range, like all the way from, high school and college students up to retirees and pre-retirees. But that's something that I struggle with every day. And that's our entrepreneur's dilemma, is like the to-do list is never done. Like, there's always, more ideas than there is time. And I don't know if I have a good solution for that. Mark Manson's like The Subtle Art book is like, some of the stuff you just got to let go. Like 4,000 Weeks, another example of like, look, step one, come to terms with like, there's a lot of stuff you're not going to do in this life, and you got to be okay with that. And like, but it's hard because you kind of like, you want to do it. It's fun. It's exciting. And still working on that.
How long you been in Seattle?
Yeah.
How long you been there?
Just over a year. We spent the last 14, 15 years in the Bay Area.
Okay. How's that change been?
It's been fun. Like, this is where my wife and I grew up.
Oh, awesome.
And so we got, all the grandparents are super close by, and it's been really cool. The kids are loving having all that extra attention.
How many kids you have?
2 boys.
What are the ages?
They're 6 and 4.
How has fatherhood changed you?
It's softened me in a lot of ways, and it's aged me horribly in a lot of ways. It's, they just know how to push your button, and it's kind of fun. But at the same time, it's super rewarding to watch them learn and grow and just like sponge up the world around them. Like, now that our oldest is reading, he's trying to find me work. He's like, nobody can hire anybody right now. Like, unemployment is super low, right? And so he sees like now hiring, or, hiring here, like at the post office and the grocery store and Home Depot. He's like, hey, Dad, you want a job at Home Depot? It says hiring. I'm like, well, how much are they going to pay? It's like, starting at $17. Like, hey, that's not bad. You want to work at Home Depot? He's like, wait a minute, you only paid me $1 for helping you with the leaves. It's like, maybe you should stop reading. But that's been a lot of fun. It's been, just trying to set a good example. You start to think about, passing the entrepreneurial mindset along. Like, okay, what are the, outside of school and education, like, what are the skills of resilience and figuring stuff out, and, reading and writing and like articulating thoughts that, are going to be most beneficial in the future. That's, I don't know, they're a little bit young, but starting to figure out some of that stuff. We're trying to train, like I think I had this soundbite, it's like, we don't say can't or something. It was like a great little clip. I don't know if I ended up like putting it out as an Easter egg at one of the episodes or something, but we don't say can't or something. It was like, that's great.
Have they expressed any interest? Are they curious about what it is that Dad does with all this gear?
Yeah, they come by. They know that Dad runs a podcast. At least the oldest one does. I don't know if the older or the younger one has much of an idea. They've made a couple cameos, like at the very end of episodes, talking about, whatever's going on in their life. It's just kind of fun to involve them in whatever little ways that you can, try and explain it. Like, I think I must have had like the homepage of the website, on the screen at one point. He's like, hey, that's Daddy, and I was like, yeah, can you read what the sign says? We'll work for freedom. I was like, exactly, buddy, exactly.
Do you think about Like how young, like at what age do you start, like you said, pass on those lessons? I just had a previous interview earlier today and talked about like she studied marketing in school and she's like, I used none of it. Like it was useless. Like I didn't learn anything in college. And it's like, can't remember anything that I specifically learned like business wise, like life lessons, yes, but like,
Yeah.
how do you think about those things?
Yeah. The way that I look at it, it's really like learning how to learn rather than like the specific lesson of the day. And I think that is a skill that was really grateful to have. Like we had a great public school system here. And for me, it was a lot of like writing practice in that craft is something that I still do use every day, whether it's, written blog posts or scripts or, that's something that was really helpful. And then more so in college, like, working with teams and delegation and, sharing responsibilities and communication, like all of that stuff was important. Much more, I don't remember what the lesson, what the specific subject matter was, didn't matter as much because, you learn so much more by doing it. And it was really grateful to have the painting business in college to be able to apply those marketing and sales classes that I took too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was reading Jay Klaus, he's been on the show before, and he's got this great newsletter that I read, and he talks about how he had a job at a newspaper, I think in college, and it taught him the importance of like meeting deadlines and accountability. And I was, that's an interesting one to learn because that's something as an entrepreneur that's definitely helpful, and especially when it comes to time to producing content on a consistent basis. I think that's something that's helpful to learn.
How do you do it? Do you have like self-imposed, like, hey, every Thursday, rain or shine, this has got to happen?
You know what? I wish I could say yes. And obviously, if you do the math on 300 plus episodes over 8 years, I've definitely missed a couple of weeks. But I think I've always wanted it never to feel like it's like a job. It's more like a passion project. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think in hindsight, maybe, it'd be nice to just have something to be more consistent with. So recently I've picked up the writing again, and I'm more consistent on Twitter. So I'm consistently doing 3 posts a day, and I'm writing a long form blog post once a week, which I just started because essentially the long form blog post is going to be the basis for how I, trim it down and do a Medium post on, whatever the highlights were there on LinkedIn or on Medium. And then I'll even pull out highlights for that that I'll tweet about. So it's the idea of creating like one pillar post of like content a week. I take time to write, I just kind of sit there started to do some more freehand writing. So it's just kind of working that muscle. And like you said, writing is one of those skills that's just invaluable as an entrepreneur. Copywriting, just writing copy, even for people who are doing videos, like I could eventually like read out the stuff on YouTube or read out the tweets as like if I wanted to do a TikTok video, just because I hate like the idea of coming on video and just not knowing what I'm going to talk about. I don't know how people do it.
It's a skill, right? Like to be able to turn on that, like, all right, go, 30-minute monologue, boom. Like, I don't know, man.
I can't do that. No, that's why I picked podcasting, because I was like, some people like to talk, some people like to write, some people like to be on video, and I was like, I can talk, and I like talking to people, so that's why I've gravitated towards it. A couple of questions as we wrap up. The hour goes by so fast. What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I wasn't prepared for this. One thing that I do struggle with is the idea of streaks, in that, if I'm going to commit to this thing, especially like, health and fitness related, diet related, it's like, I'm like all or nothing. And I used to feel like kind of I failed if I, went off the rails for a day, or if I, wasn't in alignment with my previous commitment. And then, so I've kind of scaled that back. Like, look, if you hit 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, like you still did better because you're paying attention to it. And like, just give yourself a little bit of grace, give yourself permission to be human, rather than, the rigidity of, don't break the chain, 100% or nothing.
Yeah. I think a lot of people see that, and they see people with streaks. And my partner Natalie's been doing Duolingo Spanish. She just does the 5 minutes a day, but she's got like a 700-day streak going. It's just like crazy, like 2+ years, and she hasn't missed a day. So it's kind of this idea of 1% improvement every day. And I think if you make the goal small enough, just like, I'm just going to write 1 page in the journal. And again, if you miss it, just get back on, just start again. And I think especially in this world that we live in, this entrepreneurial world, this like, like James Clear's Atomic Habits, and like everything we all read and all the books that we all share amongst each other, and podcasts, it's hard as an entrepreneur because you see everyone else just like probably like John Lee Dumas when he started with his daily episodes. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to do that too. And I'm like, I don't think you have the military discipline that he had and the financial runway either. So
That's a unique skill set. And maybe that's the James Clear thing is like, if you skip a day, get back on that horse. Don't you dare miss two, right? Like, build that habit, commit to it, build, especially, it's almost like building the identity habit of like, okay, I am the type of person who does X, Y, Z. And like, to your point about like the writing habit or the Duolingo habit, you just like, this is just something that I do, it's baked into my day.
Yeah. That's how I've thought about this new like exercise of writing. I'm like, I see it as something I'm going to do for the rest of my life. It's not like a goal, like 365 days. I'm just like, I just want to write. And the way I've heard it described from a couple of people I'm following is like, what I'm doing is sharing my journey with other people because in the hopes that it's going to inspire someone. Or like I just turned 52 like 2 days ago. I'm like, hey, like I learned.
You're a young 52. I would have guessed. I wouldn't have guessed. Even 10 years under that.
Thank you. But I think it's just like I'm also like on a spiritual journey as well, and I think we feel like we have a responsibility to raise the consciousness of the people on this planet, or raise the consciousness of this planet. And the way you do that is you just like help people who are like one rung below you. Just like, hey, here's a couple things I learned, about life, about what to do, what not to do, and if it's helpful advice for you. And that's kind of the mentality now. I'm just like sharing like what I've learned along the way, and in the hopes that it'll help people, so they don't have to make the same mistakes, or they're inspired in some way by the things that I've done or in my lifetime. So that helps me stay focused and feel like I'm at least giving back at some point now.
Yeah.
What's the most misunderstood thing about you?
Misunderstood. I think, like, I don't know if I come across this way on air, but in real life, like very quiet, very introverted, like more than happy to let other people do the talking, like in a group setting. So I get that feedback, amongst friends locally, especially like we're new to the neighborhood, and we've gotten that comment from a few of our newer friends, like, oh, Nick is so quiet, and then they go and listen to the podcast. You're like, oh my gosh, you got like, but when audio is all you got to bring some energy, and it's probably one of those things. But I'll meet people at events, and they'll say, oh, you sound just like you do on air, and like, yeah, you can't fake it over the course of 50 or 500 episodes. But that's one thing that people are sometimes surprised by, like, oh, he's super quiet in real life.
I think I've come to find over the years that I'm situationally extroverted. Like I'll go to conferences, and people see me at a conference and be like, oh, Harry's got the t-shirt. He's like running around. He's like on stage. And then at some point I've expended all that social energy, and I come back home. I'm just like back in my...
Yeah. Do you ever sometimes I just need to go back up to the hotel room and just like have just a few moments of quiet and like, okay, regroup, get ready to go back out. It's like you flew all this way. It's like, no, you're not going to just like hole up in your hotel room. Like, okay, you want to go out there and do it. And I don't know, I get a kick out of going to the events. It's like a family reunion in a lot of ways with people who kind of know what you're working on, and they get it, and they have similar goals, and it's something that I don't always get a lot locally, and so it's important to go and kind of cultivate those relationships at the different industry events.
So it's almost like something I was consciously made aware of during COVID, like how much I was dependent on like the conferences and my my entrepreneurial friends, and being new to Minneapolis, I had no friends here, so I was like doing some outreach in like 2019, and then that completely shut off, and then there's no conferences, and I'm just like, wow,
I miss my people. Yeah,
I miss my people, and that was just been so much fun. You have any conferences coming up?
Nothing on the horizon. FinCon was the last one for me, and it was it was in Florida, so it's like on the other side of the country. When they announced that, I was like, really? Like, I was really pulling for like a West Coast event. And so I was kind of bummed about going. My tiebreaker was, well, I'll submit a speaking proposal, and if they pick me, then I'll go. And so they picked me, and I was like, okay, now I still got to go. And, within 10 minutes of walking into the hotel lobby, seeing all your friends, and you're like, yes, I'm glad I'm here. Like, these are my people. I get a lot of energy from this. And so I was glad to have made the trip.
Well, Nick, I'm glad we finally made this happen. I feel like it was 8 years in the making.
Thanks for the invite. Like, always a blast.
Yeah, and it's so nice to see, folks' entrepreneurial journeys, and just to kind of track your progress and your success over the years. It's very inspirational. Highly recommended. We'll have all the links in the show notes for folks to just get inspired, because I think what's consistent, about people that had success is that they're willing to be comfortable with failure. Like, you got to try a lot of things before you know which one of the hustles is going to work out. And I've tried many things, and as you've shared here, you've tried so many things. And I think one of the main lessons I learned as an entrepreneur is just to get up, dust yourself off, and be like, yep, that didn't work.
Yeah, back to the drawing board.
Yeah. So any last thoughts or places you want to share online to have folks connect with you?
Yeah, of course, would love to have you tune in to the Side Hustle Show. You find it in all your favorite podcast apps. We cover, creative part-time business ideas, ways to make extra money every week. It's got, my mug and, some bright green cover art on it, so you can find that. But along those notes, like the, dealing with failure, the big thing is, positioning any new project in your mind as an experiment. I find for me, that like really softens the blow of the inevitable failures that come along the way. Like, I'm going to try this for 30 days. I'm going to try it to see, like, do I like doing it? Am I seeing results from it? Is it fun and exciting? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. It's like versus the, this is going to be the thing. If it doesn't work, like, life's over. Like, okay, minimize the downside, take some swings, and you find that, just having one hit erases all the losses. And I was joking with John Lee Dumas, probably the last time he was on the show. I've probably had less than 5 like meaningfully good ideas in my life. Like, it doesn't take but it's the execution, it's the consistency, it's like, and lots more bad ideas. But, just having a few ideas and seeing what happens with those.
And showing up every day. Thanks again, Nick. I really appreciate it. Thanks again to Nick for coming on the show. I always appreciate every single week, every single episode when guests take an hour of their day to have a conversation with me, and I get to share that with you, my audience. As always, full show notes available at podcastjunkies.com. Check out our revamped website, much simplified. I was hosting it somewhere else, but I'm taking a page from the folks at the Podpage website. We've recently changed platforms yet again, always experimenting. So as a podcaster, I've been highly fond. We've been checking out We've changed homes once again at podcastjunkies.com. We're hosting it on a new site. It's powered by Podpage. I've been a fan of theirs for a while, and I'm testing out the platform for this. Makes things much simpler because it actually feeds the episode into a post automatically. So I don't have to go in there and create anything. It just creates content as I release each new episode. So testing out some of those other pages. There's a sponsorship page and some other features that I'm going to be digging into, and might be sharing some of that later. Brendan, the founder of Podpage, was on an earlier episode, so make sure you listen to that one if you haven't already. Intro and outro music composed by Cedar and Soil. cedarsoil.com for his list of music. As always, don't forget to support our sponsor, Focusrite, and their awesome line of gear, specifically the new Vocaster. Special shout out to the winner of the Vocaster 2, who received an email and an early holiday gift from Daniel and myself. Learn more at podcastjunkies.com/Vocaster. Podcast production and marketing provided by Fullcast. Learn more at fullcast.co about how a podcast could be helpful for you or your brand. Next week, I have a conversation with Diana Merriam. She was at Podcast Movement in the audience as I was giving my talk about the new show I've launched, Vertical Farming Podcast, and I promised her that I'd bring her on the show and talk about her evolution in podcasting and some of the interesting things she's done. She's got a fascinating story. I can't wait to share it with you next episode. Diana Merriam. As always, thanks for all you do to support the show. Talk to you next episode. Hope you're having a happy holiday.